instead of using ink, we're going to use that to stamp with. So rub it over the stamp, add some water to it to activate it, and then use that to stamp, and that will give you a very dreamy watercolor kind of stamping. Hello, my lovely butterfly. Welcome back. It's France. This is Journaler Monday 215, and I hope you're ready to stamp with me. Now, my journal is laying flat and ready to go. And before we start stamping, we're going to apply some color on that background. I decided to go for a vintage looking paper. And to do that, I'm smudging some Distress Oxides on my table, spraying some water into that, and then I'll just swipe my journal through it. If you don't have these kind of inks, if you don't have Distress inks, just go for spray inks or whatever ink it is you have that you can create a soft, dreamy background with by blending it with some water. I'm adding a little bit more water to it to blend it even more, so you can just have a little play and see how far you want to stretch it, how dreamy you want to have it, or on the contrary, how fleshy you want to have it. The more water you add, the softer your result will be, as you can see. We're now going to go in with our first form of stamping, which might not be something that you were expecting, because we're going to use a piece of foil plastic to stamp with. So just pick up some of that leftover ink that you have on your table with that foil, and then just dab it on your journal, and that will create a very random but very interesting background. And to add even more details, we can even play with the colors that we're using. So I am still working on a vintage looking kind of paper. So I'm adding some darker brown to it in the exact same way. If you want to go for something that is way more contrasting, just add a completely different color to it. Now later on we're going to need this scrap piece of paper to add little details. So start by spraying some water and then just repeat the same step of picking up some of that ink and then dabbing it on the little piece of paper. Just keep it soft. This will just be to add little details to the spread, so it doesn't need to be too fleshy for now. And then it's time for the real stuff. So go through your stamps and select the couple that you would like to use for the background. Now, if you don't have any stamps, don't worry. You can use cards or plastic lids or other plastic kind of thingies that you have laying around for mark making. Just press them in the ink and then press them on the paper, and that will give you a whole bunch of interesting things for the background, just as good as stamps will. If you're using stamps, you then need to decide if you want to use an acrylic block or not. Using an acrylic block will make your stamp sturdy and will allow for a more crisp and regular kind of stamping. But even when you're using an acrylic block, the way that you press the stamp on the paper will give you a completely different effect, of course. And then the ink that you're using will determine whether you are having something soft that is monochromatic like I'm doing here, or if you have something that has more details, more interest to it by contrasting colors. So using a stamp without an acrylic block like I'm doing here actually allows you to use really a smaller portion of the stamp by just having that piece of the stamp touch the paper with the ink. And by the way, if you don't have an acrylic block, you can still use a ruler or the lid of an ink pad or any other flat plastic surface to which your stamp will adhere. Now for this one, I really want the numbers that are on this stamp to appear, and it's a big stamp, so it's easier to use an acrylic block for that. And then on our little piece of paper that we will be using for details, we're doing the same thing, but you can play around on this one to see what kind of different effects it gives you using different kind of inks on the background that you created. Now we don't always need to use ink to stamp, we can also use paint, and just like a vintage ledger, I want to have this real contrast between the red paint that I'm going to use here and the very soft background that I have. So I'm just smudging the paint around with a paintbrush and then using that to stamp with. The thing is, when you use paint with your stamps, just make sure that you clean them immediately. If you leave the paint to dry on your stamp, you're actually killing your stamp. Now, this is a very fine stamp, so I really need to pick up loads of paint to actually have something going on the paper. Depending on the stamp that you're using, you will need a thinner or thicker layer of paint to make this work. While I'm doing this is actually a good moment to remind you that all the products that I use are listed in the descriptions of my videos, and if you like this type of content, don't hesitate to subscribe to my channel so that when next video comes up, you will get a notification from YouTube to let you know. And if you like it, don't forget to hit the like button. Now, this is a spread about stamping, so we're not done just yet. We can also use stamping with paint to create a resist on the page, and that is what we're going to do now by stamping with a color that matches the background. So I still have quite some white on my paper, so I'm going to stamp with white on white, because later on, doing something else, this will act as a resist by not picking up the color. And just because I like the effect, I'm also stamping a little bit on the background color. Again, don't forget to clean your stamp immediately. Once it's dry, we can play with that resist, and I am doing that with a Neocolor too, because those are water soluble. So use whatever soluble scribble kind of thing it is you have, pencils, crayons. Add a little bit of that to the paper and then come in with water to blend it around, and it will stay away from that paint that you have going on. Now with that scribble, stick, crayon, pencil, whatever it is you took out, we can do something else with our stamps. Instead of using ink, we're going to use that to stamp with. So rub it over the stamp, add some water to it to activate it, and then use that to stamp, and that will give you a very dreamy watercolor kind of stamping. This will not give you a very crisp stamping. Like I said, it's a bit watercolory-ish, if that's a word, but it gives such a beautiful result that this is a technique that I really like to use. Of course, you can blend the colors on the stamp when you scrape different kind of colors on the stamp, but I'm still working on my ledger looking kind of vintage paper, so I'm trying to stick to this color scheme that I have going on. Let's do some mark making. So grab a card or a lid or whatever it is that you have that you can press in the ink and then put to the paper to have some mark making going on. If, like me, you feel like you haven't used enough different stamps just yet, pick another one, and otherwise pick another lid or another card or whatever it is you can use to spray some water on or dab it through the water. Because if, like me, you started with an ink for your background, you can actually just stamp with water, and that will make the ink react and will already give you a very soft yet very present effect in that background. Just stamp and leave the water to sit there for a couple of seconds or a minute, and then dab it back off. Now keep on going on that background until you're happy with what you have. Like add some more stamping, some more mark making with ink, with water, with that watercolor scribble effect. Just make it work for you. Keep on going until you are happy with it. If, like me, you just love splatters and you have some ink over, spray some water into it and then flicker away with a paintbrush. I want to take that vintage paper ledger feel all the way, so I'm adding some distress ink to the edges to frame the spread a little bit. Now, this might not work for what you have going on, so you might want to add some stamping on the border as well. And then again, you need to decide if you want to keep it monochromatic and go with the same kind of colors, or on the contrary, have it stand out. And if, like me, you have this white paint or a light paint resist effect going on, just dab some water over it to bring it back to the surface. Time to start working on a focal point. I decided to use my FP009 stamp set and to go with this butterfly. The first thing that we're going to do is to stamp the focal image directly on the spread. So this time we're going to use black ink because we really want this to stand out. Now, this is a good start, but it's not a focal point just yet. But before we come back to that, let's grab that piece of scrap paper that we stamped on, and let's cut a number of pieces that we can use to enhance the background. And then just have a little play to see where it is you can put which piece of paper. Let's go back to that focal point and let's do one type of stamping that we haven't done just yet, which is the combo embossing ink, embossing powder. So stamp the image again on another piece of scrap paper with embossing ink, and then sprinkle over it with embossing powder. Now, if you don't have these, just stamp it again with some black ink. Make sure that the image is nicely on there and that your black ink is not water reactive. If need be, you can clean the image a little bit. Now, don't worry about all those background details like the text that I have here, because we're just going to use the focal image in Say. So for me, that's that little butterfly. And then of course we need to melt the powder with the heat gun, which is always such a magical moment to see that powder shift and change. Now we can colorize this, and in order to make it work with the background, we're going to reuse some of the inks and scribble sticks that we used to build up the background, except that we're going to blend them with water so that we can use them as some sort of watercolor. That is why if you just stamped your image with ink, you needed some ink that was not water reactive in order to be able to do just this. And then cut out the image so that we can really focus on that focal point. Although I know there's no point in doing this because at some point it will just lay flat in my journal, I do like to shape this kind of focal point. So I want my butterfly to look as if it's flying on the paper. So if you have a focal point that you can do the same thing with, just have fun with it, even if there is no point to it, because it will lay flat in the journal anyways. And this is the magic of restamping an image to glue it on an already stamped image. This will give you this extra dimension of movement. Again, I want this to look like vintage stuff, so I'm just distressing and distressing some more and distressing until it looks like a vintage piece of paper that is going into my journal. So if you went for the same kind of look, don't be afraid to mistreat it. It's just a piece of paper and it needs to look like it has gone through things. Now, so far everything looks very soft, and an easy way to make it look not so soft is just to add some black stamping right on that background. So let's repeat some of the stuff that we've already done, but this time with black ink. And talking of black accents, adding something to a spread, there's nothing like black splatters to add some intensity to a spread. If you don't have a black paint marker like I'm using here, just use some black paint, add some water to it, and then flicker it on with a paintbrush. When that is done, you can glue down the little elements of the spread and see how everything is coming together. Now we can still add a little detail that will still be a detail while it's there, and for me that is a black little rose that will go on that left side because there's little going on. And it might seem that adding some stamping in black will take too much attention to it, but it's not going to happen. This is just like a little tattoo that if you don't pay attention to it, you don't really see it. And to show you that a focal point doesn't need to be stamped in black, we're going to add our focal point in a completely contrasting color. So pick out a word that you would like to add to your spread, and then pick a contrasting ink color. So I'm going back with red that I used for the paint stamping, and that is going to be the sentiment on my spread, and you will see that it stands out completely, despite the fact that it is not stamped with black. Don't forget to add a date stamp on your spread. It's always fun to know when you actually created that. Now take one last look at your spread to see what it is missing to really make it yours, to really make it resonate with you. For me, in this case, it was some blue splatters in paint so that they would really stand out from the background. And that's it. I hope you had fun creating your spread together with me. If you did and you share it on social media, don't forget to tag me so that I can share some love with you. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and I'll see you back here next time. Meanwhile, don't forget to put down a layer a day in a mindful way. Butterfly kisses.